Welcome back to the fourth episode of Going Deep. I'm live with Fernandez, your host, and I'm here in studio once again with Mookie's. I think I said that right. Mookie's Sultans of Dallas and Isotopes. Today we are going to talk about some more saber metrics, as well as how you can maximize your fantasy performance with only a short few minutes a week. So stay tuned for more fantasy goodness. Yeah, so we are here actually. We are separate. We are not in studio. I'm live from France. Mike, you are still in Colorado, and of course Dallas still represented with Mookie's and Sultans of Dallas. France is good, but it is difficult on the fantasy lineup, I must say. For the first reason being that you can't read anything on your webpage.
Does your webpage show up in French?
Yeah, exactly.
Really?
But luckily, once I go into fantasy, then the webpage turns over.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So, but like accessing fantasy is interesting. You have to do a little more hunting.
That's awesome.
But I am logging in for the first time today, unfortunately, gentlemen. And so I think it is an interesting topic to discuss. When you do get busy or you switch countries, how do we maximize our fantasy performance in just a short period of time?
Well, you probably are one of the foremost experts on that topic. You and Mike, anyway. How do you guys make it work and yet still stay contenders?
I will say one thing that has been really helpful to me is installing the Yahoo Fantasy app. If only because it has that option to put in active players. And truly, that probably shrinks the whole setting your lineup process down to like 2 minutes. So
it's excellent. I was not aware that they had an app, so I will have to download this now that I have upgraded to a smartphone.
What? We've told you that so many times that they have an app. I think we've even said it on the podcast before.
But this is a flip phone phenomenon that when you have a flip phone, you tend to tune out anything that's about a smartphone because it makes you feel small.
So now you can play Pokemon Go with us, Joe.
You're in France. You can catch all the French Pokemon.
This is great.
They have spots in London. I know they have. I've read articles referring to people catching Pokemon in London, so it must be more than just here in the States.
Yeah, it's a thing. Although I am not aware of it. But fantasy. My suggestion. What I tend to do, and I think it's easier for baseball than hockey because players are playing almost every day, and so what you can do is sort of anticipate, who's going to play. Obviously, with setting the lineup, you can put in the guys that not just that are doing well now, but that are going to be good long term in the season, and so you can make those your starters. Pitchers, the same thing. Pitchers, sometimes the best strategy, anyways, is to have fewer starters. And so I just keep in the guys who are obviously well below 100, but more in the, below 75 ranking. And then these guys they're people you can count on. And so you can see, even though I'm not setting my lineup, I'm still 500.
I almost wish you could preset your lineup for getting the pickups that you think you're going to get. There'd probably be no way to see it. That would really help.
Yeah, this is true. That would be nice.
That's not a bad idea though, Joe, because when you do that strategy, you do end up punting wins and strikeouts.
Yep.
But you probably only have around 5 relievers on your team regardless, even if you're playing every day. So that isn't something you need to attend to. And then if you just go with the best 5 starters on your team, you can still have a good shot at ERA and WHIP.
Exactly. And if you have 4 or 5 pitchers that are playing consistently, you can still play that strategy, and then come playoff time, if you've got other guys that you want to spot start or you got guys you want to put in, the playoffs you're going to still be in contention. But I feel like the goal in the season, at least for me, the goal is just to make the playoffs. And with this strategy, I feel like you can, and then when the playoffs come around, you can play those other guys that every now and then and see if you can snag more categories. But it's worked so far, but I haven't won in a while.
Joe has the Detroit Red Wings of strategies when it comes to managing your team. You're content with just making the playoffs and know you're never going to win the whole thing.
You say this like it's a negative thing.
As a disgruntled Detroit Red Wings fan right now, yes. But it probably depends in part as well on why you're playing. What's your purpose of playing fantasy sports?
Exactly.
And what aspects of it are fun? The downside, of course, is that we want our leagues to be competitive, and so we definitely don't want any dead rosters. But we also would prefer people to be managing their teams to be maximally competitive, even if for the sake of it not skewing the standings, because it may be an okay strategy for your team's own positioning to just make it to the playoffs, but it can affect when you're not setting your lineup some weeks and then you choose to set it in other weeks. It can have a pretty much entirely unanticipated effect on others' places in the standings.
Yep,
Right,
that's a good
right.
point.
Yep. Anyways, something more important, sabermetrics.
Sabermetrics.
We could frame this by introducing a Tale of Two Grays, which is referring to two of my pitchers, John Gray and Sonny Gray. John has consistently underperformed his ERA estimators. And when I say that, I'm referring to stats like FIP, XFIP, and SIERA. And Sonny Gray has consistently overperformed his estimators, or I guess more correctly, he had overperformed them until this season, whereas now he's kind of crashing back down to earth, some might say. So I thought I'd discuss why that might be. Are these really useful tools, these estimators, to begin with, and so on?
Get at it. So what are all of those things you just said?
What about starting with BABIP?
Well, actually, first I think I'll start with just what FIP and SIERA are.
Okay.
These are measures of just particular aspects of a pitcher's game. So FIP is calculated from strikeouts, walks, and home runs. And XFIP is similar. It's just instead of home runs, you use league average home run to fly ball ratio. SIERA is based on also strikeouts and walks, but also ground balls and fly balls. And it's a little bit more complicated equation, but it's still just based on a linear regression that is updated for each season, I believe. And the idea that, or at least the way that they're used typically now, they're considered to be estimators of a pitcher's actual ERA. These are supposedly the outcomes that a pitcher can control, and it's independent of other things like random chance and defense and things like that. So some would say that they're more accurate depictions of how well a pitcher is pitched. I don't necessarily believe that's the case, but I do think they're still useful. So I'll get into that. But before we do that, I will address, Joe, like you had said, BABIP, which is batting average on balls in play. This is, I think, one of the more misused, but also one of the most popular sabermetrics out there. You hear the guys on like ESPN podcasts talk about it all the time. Basically, it just takes, every time you put a ball into play, how many of those times do you get a hit? And it tends to normalize, for the most part, people hover around 300. Now, there's a lot of variation around that, but it's hard to sustain a BABIP that is much higher than that or much lower than that. So people consider it then to be a useful measure of luck, because they say, well, if everyone tends to approach 300 over time, if somebody's way over, he must have a lot of luck is fueling his recent success. So you have to figure he's going to regress to the mean. Does that make sense?
Yep. As clear as a glass of crystal for champagne.
Thanks, Ben.
You're welcome.
Now, you probably noticed by the way I was describing that, though, that I don't fully buy it. A lot of times you'll hear people just speak to BABIP as if, anyone who's ways off from 300, that's unsustainable. He's going to come back to Earth. Whereas I think you have to be a little bit more nuanced in your interpretation of it.
Right.
Because the stat assumes that all of the balls in play...
All balls in play are identical.
Yeah, essentially, or that at least they all average out to be the same. So for a pitcher, it assumes that he's allowing the same distribution of contact results as every other pitcher. So maybe there's some variation. It's not all pitchers are the same, but every pitcher has the same profile.
Right. Yeah, which we know is not the case because some pitchers, where they put the ball, they force batters into terrible contact, and other pitchers, might not be as precise. And so
Yeah. I think there are other factors to consider. There are reasons that players will sometimes overperform or underperform BABIP consistently. That like Clayton Kershaw, it will consistently have a fairly low BABIP. Because he just doesn't allow that many base runners, and that's not a luck-based thing. It's
a skill set.
Right. All balls in play are not created equal. So if you have a pitcher who's giving up a lot of line drives, for example, he's going to have a higher BABIP because those are more often go for hits, especially if the contact is hard.
The team plays into that as well, where what's the team behind you? What's the defense like? How do they play? What's the field like? All those things could affect that. So if the issue here, John Gray, he's consistently underperforming, and Sonny Gray is consistently overperforming those metrics. Is this correct? But I would think then, would this make sense then? Because, Sonny Gray is Oakland versus Colorado here. Sonny Gray's in Oakland, John Gray's in Colorado. I got to think that's got to play a factor here maybe. Colorado's typically a place where pitchers are going to get thrashed. And Oakland is typically a place where they're going to find, their shoes cleaned. So what do you think?
In Colorado, there's no doubt that ball's going to be sailing through the air better,
And you know that from your first-hand experience, when you throw balls where you're living right now in Colorado Springs, do they go farther?
Yeah. I throw one. I hop on a plane and I go to Michigan and I throw one there, and it's just a world of difference.
There we go, folks.
Yep.
Personal experience.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do think so. Yeah, I think that's a great example. Like you said, team defense matters as well as where you're playing, because we know that there are actual differences from ballpark to ballpark. And you can look at this. One of the sources, ESPN has a park factors page. You can probably get to it from the menus, but it's espn.go.com/MLB/stats/park factor. And it calculates those by the total number of runs scored by both teams at the home field. So in the case of the Rockies, it would be the total runs scored in Coors versus the total runs scored when the Rockies are on the road. So it includes all Rockies runs, but also their opponents' runs. And then it just divides those by each other, so you get a ratio. I was skeptical to some extent. I thought for a while that park factors were overrated, overstated. Everyone talks about Coors all the time. Oh, it's such a hitter's park. It's so terrible. I'm not going to own any pitchers, any Rockies pitchers, because they play half their games at Coors. And I thought, well, hang on, the factors can't be that big. And that's part of the reason that I do own John Gray, because I think they may be overstated a little bit. But that said, I did look at the factors again recently for the past several years as well, and the number of runs scored at Coors is consistently way higher than all the other fields. Yeah. It's a very real phenomenon there that we're talking like the range of run factors for the rest of the parks ranges from around 0.8 to 1.2. So in that range. And then all of a sudden you've got Coors, which is consistently around 1.5. So like 50% more runs scored at Coors than when the Rockies are on the road. That's a big difference. And I think since it is consistent, this isn't just statistical noise. There's something here. Why it is, I'm not entirely sure. The thin air has got to be one of the main factors. If you look at the home runs, it's also one of the worst fields for home runs, but it's not like it's an outlier there. There are other parks that also have short fences, so more of the hits will go for homers. It does seem to be mainly hits and runs scored where Coors is an outlier.
And are a lot of those extra base hits? Because I guess I was wondering then in terms of the air factor, even if you don't have balls leaving the park, you're still getting extra base hits because it does have the factor is.
You'd think thered be a trade-off there a little bit, where if your fences are further out, you'll have more doubles and triples, and if they're further in, you might have more home runs.
Mm-hmm.
It could also be the fact that Colorado is a very fit place, and Denver is a very fit city, and there are so many attractive people in the stadium that then the hitters then want to impress all the women around them, and so they then do better. Yep.
It could be. Although, wouldn't the pitchers want to impress as well? Maybe throw a little bit harder.
This is the thing. But see, the pitchers are usually less attractive than the hitters. They're really like lanky, right? They're really like, Okay, this is stupid, but anyway.
Joe always has some interesting insight to add.
Deep and profound.
Well, to respond to what you guys are saying there, yes, Coors has a pretty big lead in terms of its doubles factor as well. It's a lot more doubles this year, but that was not true last year. So I think the reason I singled out hits and runs is that they were consistently outliers in those categories over the last several years.
And we don't necessarily have to belabor the point, but I wonder about the things like hard hit rate, because I wonder if something that small, I mean, obviously part of the factor here of having the air be thinner is there's less friction on the ball, so it's moving faster and it's going farther.
Yep.
And I wonder if something as simple as that slight uptick in the velocity of the ball when it's leaving bats in general it's not so much about the power then at that point, because you could get singles. If the ball's going through the infield faster, you're going to have more hits in general. It doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have more extra base hits, just more hits in general.
Yep. Everything we're talking about here about the Coors factor could also explain John Gray's low estimators, his SIERA and his FIP. Exactly. I think both are very low. Actually, about a full run lower than his actual ERA. And part of the reason could be that FIP, it takes home runs, Ks, and walks into account. So it's not going to consider factors like that. So yes, he has a good FIP because, well, he strikes out a lot of batters, he doesn't walk very many. He doesn't allow an inordinate number of home runs, I don't think. And many would say, well, that's an indicator that he's actually pitching better than his ERA, the story told by his ERA. But I think those other factors are relevant.
I mean, really what having a good FIP tells you is that you have a good FIP.
Exactly.
It's like...
Yeah, I was reading an article about recently that was explaining how those stats, those metrics, were not originally intended to estimate the ERA necessarily. They were just scaled to an ERA scale, by applying a factor to them so that they'd be easier to interpret.
Yeah.
But they weren't really intended to be an estimator of what an ERA is supposed to be. I think that's how they're used now. You'll hear it over and over again, but I think people aren't really applying them correctly. Well, as long as you use, say, FIP, for example, if you use it as a measure of strikeouts, a composite measure of strikeouts, walks, and home runs, if you know that's what it means, it can still be relevant, because it'll tell you how good a pitcher is in those categories. You just know that it doesn't tell the whole story.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah. Yep. Because there's the girlfriend factor, like Justin Verlander. Right. There's other. What? What's wrong?
Sorry, I'm driving to work.
Are you on a motorcycle?
It's the car next door.
Jeez.
Well, that's all the time we have for today, folks. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Going Deep. Next week, our next episode, I should say, we are hoping to bring in some more guests. So please message us if you would like to participate in our podcast, and comment. We love comments on YouTube and views.
Wrap up. That shit's contagious.